Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. What is real? Let's find out. They may be mythical, but they're real. Mythical champions and primal shards have launched. They are live in the game. In today's video, we are going to be discussing everything about this event, what it means for the future of Raid, what it means for free-to-play players, for big spenders, for Krakens and whales. We're going to talk about the economy of Raid moving forward. We're also going to talk about all of the different aspects of getting your mythical champions. How do you get them? How easy is it going to be to get them? Where are you going to get them from? How many can you get? We're going to talk about all of that. So we're going to do a real top to bottom deep dive into mythical champions, primal shards, and what they mean to Raid Shadow Legends right now and moving forward. So I think the first and foremost thing on every player's mind has been the power creep potential when you introduce a new rarity of champion, especially one that's at the top of the heap, right? These mythical champions are more rare than legendaries, therefore they're likely to be more powerful than legendaries. And so we're worried that our legendaries will be marginalized, that the roster that we already have will be weaker in comparison, and how that will play out in the game over the coming weeks and months. So that's the first thing we're going to take a look at. We're going to look at the power creep just based on one example champion. We're going to look here at Siegfried the Nephilim. Maybe we'll look at one more champion just to have another point of comparison. But let's start right now with the stats. Let's look at the base stats, because we were told that the stats would be better than those of legendary champions. So if I'm looking at Siegfried the Nephilim's stats here, I'm noticing a couple of things. One is that the HP pool is not particularly high, 16,350 HP. There are rares with that much HP. There are epics with that much HP. Now, this is an attack-based champion. He's supposed to be a damage dealer. So let's go ahead and just say, yeah, okay, so maybe the HP pool is not the primary focus of this champion, and that makes sense. Now, the attack stat is very high. At 1663, we're looking at probably the highest attack stat I think I've seen in the game so far, but not by a mile, right? This is high, but it's not 1700 or 1800 or numbers we've never seen before. We've seen champions in the 1500s and in the 1600s before. One of the things I am noticing, though, is that the defense is very high for an attack-based champion. So this champion is going to be more survivable than most attack-based champions. Champions who have 1500 attack tend to have like 900 defense, maybe even 800 defense. The speed here is nice and high at 110. That's not game-breaking speed, but it's certainly fast. And then none of the other stats are unusual for legendary champions. So I do think that the comparison here that we want to make is to other attack champions, or maybe other attack void legendaries, because I think void legendaries were the strongest version of champions we had before the advent of mythical champions. So let's go ahead and compare Siegfried to a void legendary attack-based champion. Okay, so here I've pulled up Supreme Athel. She is in the same faction, the Sacred Order. She is an attack-based void legendary. And if we look at the stats, the HP is similar, only a few hundred different. The attack is similar. It's almost 1600, so we're only giving up about 70 attack there to Nephilim. The defense is lower. We're over 200 points lower defense, so that's one of the big differences. And then the speed is slightly lower. The crit rate, the crit damage are the same. So in terms of overall stats, I would say that these two champions are relatively close. Siegfried the Nephilim actually does have a small advantage overall, a little bit more HP, a little bit more attack, 10 more speed, which is not insignificant, but mostly the biggest difference is in that defensive stat. So he's actually pulling down over 1100 defense, which makes him significantly more survivable than you would typically expect from a legendary attack champion. As another point of comparison, here we have Constantine the Dayborn, who is another void legendary attack-based champion from the Sacred Order. You can see his HP is a lot lower. His attack is a lot lower. His defense is actually a little bit higher. His speed is closer. So in this particular case, he's not giving up as much speed. He's not giving up any defense. He is giving up a bit more of attack and a bit more of HP. Now, Constantine's a little bit older than Supreme Athel. And there has been power creep even amongst Void legendaries. So I think based on the most recent Void legendaries, the stat creep on the mythical champions is not crazy. It is a small bump up, but it's definitely within sort of the margins of what we would expect to just happen with new Void legendaries. Now, Sigfrind here does have a second form, so let's go ahead and look at that form and see how the stats change. Okay, so in this form, he is a support champion. We can check his skills to see where his damage is based. His damage is still based on attack, although he only has one attack. That's his A1. So in this form, he gets more HP, so he's up to 20.6k. His attack drops down to 1100. His defense jumps up to 1365. His speed remains the same. It looks like his resist and accuracy might also change. Just the resist. He has no accuracy in either form. And his crit damage drops from 63 to 50%, which makes sense because he's now a support champion. So again, in this particular case, I don't think any of these stats are outlandish. We've seen epic champions that have more than 20k HP. We've seen epics that have more than 1365 defense. I think having 1100 attack on this build or on this form is a lot for a support champion, so he may still do some decent damage, or at least better damage than a regular support would do in terms of attack stat, at least. And again, the speed is still very fast at 110. But in terms of stat power creep, I don't see this as overwhelming. This feels like a reasonable step up from Void legendaries, right? In fact, it seems to be within the realm of just powerful champions in the game. There are champions who are at every rarity who are stronger than other champions of those rarities or other champions of those types, be they support, HP, defense, attack-based champions, what have you. So it feels like this is just a champion with a nice stat pool, but not an overwhelming one. In terms of power creep, we also have to consider some other aspects of these champions. Obviously, they have more skills than everybody else, right? We've got 6 abilities here. We've got 6 abilities here. I mean, the aura doesn't change, so that's going to be the same in both forms. And then one of the skills is the metamorph skill. But still, a lot of additional skills means more tactical flexibility. However, we know that the masteries don't change with the form. We also know that the build doesn't change with the form. So when you have an attack-based form, and then you have an HP-based form, you have to decide which one you're going to optimize in terms of your build, or if you're going to go for somewhere in between. Now, if you try to make Sigfrind a very optimized attack-based damage dealer, then he is going to suffer in the support role. He won't have as many stats in the support role that would support him or specialize him as a support. So he's going to be weaker as a support than he will be as an attack-based champion if you go in that direction. Likewise, you could reverse it. You could go in sort of the support role, and then the attack form would do less damage. Now, having a little bit better base stats may give you some added flexibility in building those champions out, but without being able to change masteries and without being able to change gear in between the two forms, I think that's actually a really good idea. This means that these champions are going to be a little bit more balanced. You can get some extra tactical value out of the alternate form, but you're probably either going to have to optimize towards one form, or you're going to have to pick a build that is somewhere in between, meaning neither form will be optimized, but the versatility of the champ will be more emphasized, and that will bring value to your team compositions. Let's go ahead and take a look at just one more mythical champion. Here is Garal Bloodmaul, who is in the Orc faction. Now you can see here she is an HP based champion. You can see a nice HP pool, 24k. That's very high, but again, not game breakingly high. The attack is relatively low. That's not going to play. 1300 defense, really reasonable for an HP based legendary. Right, this is good defense, but not amazing defense. Speed of 102, some resistance and accuracy in the kit. But basically, if you looked at these stats, you would think this is a very good stat pool, but not an overwhelmingly strong one. Here is a Void legendary HP-based champion in the same faction. This is Angar, and you can see his HP pool is about 22k, so he's giving up a very little bit of HP, and his defense is 1288, so he's giving up a tiny bit of defense here. He is giving up a little bit of speed, a little bit of resistance, and a little bit of accuracy. But again, the difference between these two, between the Mythic and the Legendary, is relatively small, and I don't think game-breaking in this case. Let's go ahead and take a look at Blood Maul's alternate form, her secondary form. Very cool visuals. I like the visuals. Really cool character model. The weapons are pretty great. And I mean, even the like sort of magma glow through her skin, very cool. Her feet are on fire. She's very interesting looking. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the stats here. First of all, she's become an attack-based champion. So her HP has dropped significantly. Her attack has climbed up to 1608, which is pretty high. Not as high as some of the other champions we've seen, but still very high to be over 1600. Again, a very nice defense number here at 1178 for an attack-based champion. So she's going to be tankier than most attack-based champions, at least in terms of defense, right? Her HP pool isn't amazing. It's not bad, but it's not amazing. Her speed stays at 102. She still has the resist, but she loses the accuracy. So if we flip back, yeah, you can see the stat changes here. So again, I think a reasonable increase in terms of the stats that she has over a Void Legendary champion. Let's go ahead and just make one more comparison. Here is Supreme Gaelic, a Void Legendary attack-based champion in the same faction. And we can see his HP pool is a little bit higher at 17k instead of 16k. His attack is a little bit lower, just about 100 lower. His defense is significantly lower. His speed is close. It's a little bit slower. And his resist and accuracy are just a tad off. But it's close, right? And we know that Supreme Gaelic is a very good Void Legendary. He's not top tier. But the reason he's not top tier is not necessarily because of his stats. His stats are legitimate. His stats are good and about where they should be for a Void Legendary. I don't think anybody would say his stats are too low. If we were to look at it, we could maybe say you could, get a little bit more attack onto this champion. But if his multipliers are good, then the attack number doesn't really matter. We have very hard-hitting champions who have their attack numbers in the 1400s, not even the 1500s. So I think this is a very reasonable comparison for the new Mythic in this faction, and I think she is better statistically, but the main power is going to come from the additional skill sets and the versatility that we have in the Mythical Champions kits. So as you can see, I think there will be power creep in the game, but we've only got 5 of these champions, and they are a reasonably small step up, significant but small step up from Void Legendaries. So I think they're basically going to take over the role for the end game player of the Void Legendary. They're going to be the aspirational champions that we all want, that we want to get to. But I don't think they're going to be game breaking in terms of power creep. And this is not surprising. Power creep happens in these games. It has to happen in these games. There is no way to avoid power creep unless your game dies. But Raid Shadow Legends has a history of doing a pretty good job of putting out new champions that are reasonable in terms of their power creep compared to the current champion pool. Every once in a while, we get a nice step up, a new evolution in champion power. Acrizia was one of those. Yumiko was one of those. We see champions like that. But because there are only 1 or 2 champions at a time that have that power level, and they're so difficult to get, the overall game doesn't creep up in power very quickly. And I think Mythical champions are going to fit that mold. So I think our fear, or the community's fear of power creep, has maybe been, I've talked about this in previous videos. We don't really trust Plarium all that much. We love the game. We love Raid Shadow Legends, but we don't really trust the company to do what's best for the players. But I do think we can trust them to do what's best for them, right? They are self-motivated, they are self-interested, and they do not want the death of Raid Shadow Legends. They do not want this game to stop making money, and they know that if they break the game, that will happen. So I do think that the economics of this move make sense for Plarium, but they are also well aware of the dangers of introducing a higher rarity champion. And so I think they've thought well and hard about how to do this right. And it feels like, at least from a power creep perspective, that they've done a pretty good job here. That might not be what you want to hear. We don't necessarily all like this move, but it is reassuring to think that our game, the game that we've been investing all our time and effort in, hasn't changed so much as to make all of our efforts prior to this point useless. So now I think it's time to address maybe the second most major fear, is that this will change the way the in-game economy works. It will create even more space between the Krakens and whales and the low spenders and the free-to-play players. It's a pay-to-win mechanic, and if you don't spend, you won't be able to compete. And I think the center of this fear, the central idea behind this fear, is that the Primal Shard will be incredibly rare. So we are looking at the Primal Shard right now. It is the only way to get these mythical champions, and if it is the rarest shard in the game, we may never ever see mythical champions on our account. Especially if you're a free-to-play player or a low spender, you may think any one of these champions is just beyond my reach. So let's actually talk about how shards turn into value in our roster, and then we'll be able to place the Primal Shard here amongst the other shards in terms of respective value. So the first thing I want to do is I want to actually show you my roster, because we're going to use this as a point of discussion, of analysis here. And as you can see, this is every single legendary I have ever acquired on this account. I've never fed one. I've never empowered one. So this is literally every single copy of every type of legendary I've ever received. And that's from any source, whether it's from a shard pull, from a fusion event, from an in-game reward, from a login reward. Why does this matter? Well, this matters because we want to know, where do we get our power from? Where do we get our most important champions from? How many of them do we get? How often do we get them? And how does that move not only your individual account in Raid Shadow Legends, but sort of the competitive landscape of Raid Shadow Legends? So now that you've actually seen my full roster of legendaries, I want to actually talk a little bit about my history, my legendary drop history. Now, I am a free-to-play player. I've never spent $1 on this account. So I am going to be looking at it from that standpoint. But this is something that I think we all need to look at, whether you are a spender, even if you're a Kraken, because you get free resources. Everybody gets free resources. So when you look at my free-to-play history, you are sort of looking at the base minimum resources that everybody can get, right? Now, obviously, if you don't know where to get those resources, or if you're not as experienced a player, you may miss out on some things. But my point is, if you are a whale, you are still getting the free-to-play resources that I'm getting. You're getting resources in addition to that, but you are not missing out on the resources that I'm getting. So we can use this as a baseline to determine how rare champions actually are, how valuable different shard types are, and what that means in the short term and in the long term for an account. So the first thing here is, how old is my account? Well, it is 822 login days old. So that is 27 months and 12 days of raid time. It's about 27 months of real world time, because raid months are 30 days, and that's not true for the regular calendar, but 822 login days. Out of all of my champions, all of my pulls, I have acquired 67 non-void legendaries. That is a rate of 1 non-void legendary every 12 days. Now, I've only gotten 47 of those from shards. 20 of them have been from other aspects of raid, whether those are fusions or login champions or reward champions like Arbiter, Mithrala, Lydia. Now, what that means is, on average, I am pulling a non-void legendary from a shard about every 17 and a half days. Looking at this, you may think that this sounds pretty fast, or maybe you think it sounds very slow, depending on your account and your luck with the RNG of pulling shards, or what events you've chosen to pull shards on. But one thing to consider is that the first year was slower than this, and the current year is faster than this. So I think I'm actually pulling more than a non-void legendary every 12 days. And originally in the first 6 months of my account, it was maybe every 20 or 25 days. So this has sped up, but it's probably reached about the peak. I can't really go any faster than I'm currently going, because I'm currently pulling in every sacred shard that I can in the game. And I'm not missing out on any. So this is about as fast as I can get. Now, if we look at the Void Legendaries, it's a very different story. First of all, I only have 14 Void Legendaries, which is one roughly every 59 days. So that's a lot slower. I'm getting 5 non-Void Legendaries for every Void Legendary that I get. So here are my 14 Void Legendaries. And if we look at these, we can see that Mithrala, Arbiter, Vizix, and Lydia are all reward champions, as is Yukari. You can buy him, as is Urost the Soul Cage. He is a Doom Tower champion. So those 6 champions have come from rewards. In addition, I have 2 from fusions. I have Emek Trunkheart and I have Supreme Elhain that came from a fusion. So out of all of my Void champions, I've only pulled 6 from shards. Cardiel, Allele, Raglan, Little Miss Annie, Tamesia, who was my most recent pull, and a duplicate Supreme Elhain, which was a little bit painful. But so 6 Void Legendaries from shards in over 800 days of playing. So if we look back at this chart and we can talk about, my voids that I pulled from shards, those 6 average out to about 1 Void Legendary champion every 137 days. Now, finally, if you look at all of my legendaries from all sources, all shards, all other places, all fusions, I have 81 legendaries. 53 of them have come from shards. And so I pull a legendary from a shard about every 15 and a half days. Now, when I did this analysis, I was like, that feels about right to me. I think I get about 2 legendaries per month. And so that bears out, and that makes sense. And by the way, that pace feels pretty good to me as a free-to-play player. I cannot book 2 legendary champions a month. I can't do it. I can usually book about 1. So more than half of the legendaries I've ever acquired are either sitting at level 50 unbooked, or they're not even at level 50 yet. I have several that are still at level 1. Some of them are Vault Guardians. Some of them are duplicates. Some of them are just champions that I use in faction crypts and nowhere else. But I have to select the legendaries that I choose to build very carefully, because the limiting factor isn't the champions or how many I get. It is the books that I have to actually empower those champions and make them as valuable as they can be. Now I have a second slide here. It's called Shard Expected Return Comparison. So we're going to be comparing the expected return on pulling shards. And all shard income is approximated from all free-to-play sources. So this is basically what I can get in any given month or week or what have you. Usually I'm basing it on 6-week increments in between 2 times shard events. Now the expected return is calculated only using the rates from those 2 times shard events. I'm not getting into the more complex calculations of guaranteed champions or 1-for-1 champions or 10 times events or anything like that. So just assume as a free-to-play player, we are only pulling from 2 times shard events. These are our expected returns for each of these types of shards. So if we start off with ancient shards, I collect roughly 20 ancient shards per week. I actually think it's a little bit higher than 20 per week, but I do think 20 per week is a reasonable number. I'm not considering ancient shard packs that you would buy with gems either. So, maybe you could get 25 per week, but let's call it 20 per week just for now, just for a nice, easy round number. And if you are pulling only during 2 times shard events, you would be getting roughly 1 legendary every 35 days. When we get to sacred shards, we get far fewer sacred shards, but the return on the drop rate for legendary champions is much higher. So we're only roughly pulling down 2.75 sacred shards per week. And that is pretty much maxed out. That is fairly close to the maximum. That means getting 4 clan boss top tier chests, so 2 from Ultra Nightmare, 2 from Nightmare, and also clearing Doom Tower hard every month, plus whatever other sources that you can get, but those are basically the only repeatable, predictable sources. And so you're getting about 2.75 per week. That's it. That's all you get, 2.75 per week. And that turns into a legendary every 21 days. So forgetting the calculation of rare champions or epics or food or chickens or anything like that, we can see that in general, sacred shards actually return us more legendary champions than ancient shards do. And that makes a lot of sense. We have 12 times the drop rate on sacred shards that we have on ancient shards. So we would have to get 12 times as many ancient shards in order for the expected return to equal out. And we're not doing that here. We're getting about 7 times the return on sacred shards, maybe 8 if you are pulling more shards down per week, maybe 9 at the maximum, but we're definitely not getting to 12. So if you are only pulling during 2 times shard events, both for ancients and for sacreds, this is the rough comparison you're going to have between those two shards in terms of expected return on legendaries. Now, the nice thing here is we can actually combine these two shards. They're not competing against each other. They're both working for us. So if we were looking at all non-void shards, we pull down roughly one legendary every 13.125 days. When I say we, I mean people who are in my situation at endgame, like I said, where you're pulling down those clan boss chests and you're doing Doom Tower. If you aren't doing that yet, the amount of time in between legendary pulls will be a little bit longer, and that's fine. But as you progress in the game, you will get closer and closer to this mark. Likewise, if you're a spender, you may accelerate this considerably by buying shard packs, whether you're buying, void shards or sacred shards or ancient shards or what have you. Okay, now let's do a comparison to void shards, because despite the fact that sacred shards are kind of billed as the top tier shard, we all know that the top tier champions can only come from void shards. So if you want that Acrisia, if you want that Yumiko, if you want that Krisk, you have no other option but pulling that champion from a void shard. So in some ways, the void shard is a lot more valuable than the sacred shard. And we do get more of them. We get about 5.5 per week. I think I've gotten as many as maybe 6 to 6.25 per week in really good weeks. And then I've gotten a little bit less than that in bad weeks. But typically I get at least 5 per week here at endgame. And again, you're getting those primarily from the clan boss and also from Doom Tower. Void shards happen from both normal Doom Tower and hard mode Doom Tower. But in general, 5.5 shards, void shards per week is what you can expect. And that would turn into a legendary void champion every 127 days. Now that's pretty long. That's over 4 months. So you are getting fewer than 3 legendary void champions every year. And this is relevant because the mythical champions are sort of the new void legendary. They're a small step up from that. So we should expect to get fewer mythicals per year than we're getting void legendaries. Okay, so why this long discussion of all these drop rates and my history with shards and all of the expected return? Well, it's because Raid needs to fit mythical shards into this system. And they know these numbers better than we do, right? They know exactly what the rates should return. They know exactly what they intend in terms of the rarity of their shards and why those rarities are designed that way, because they are trying to get people to buy packs, but they're also trying to satisfy players and keep them in the game. So it is a balancing task for them. They have to balance, the needs of their company in terms of income with the desire of the player in terms of reward. So if this is the system that they've found has worked for them for the last 4 years, they're not likely to overturn this drastically. This still has to work. So this brings us back to the Primal Shard. What do we expect out of the Primal Shard? Well, there is some information that we've gotten today, actually yesterday, I think, in terms of the drop rates. So let's go ahead and look at the drop rates here. So first of all, you'll notice that the Primal Shards drop all 4 rarities. Now, I know that a lot of people were really angry about this. They're saying this is the most important shard in the game. Why is it dropping a very weak rarity, rare champions? And I want to sort of measure that response a little bit. I want us to think about that response a little bit. What would we prefer happen? Let's say we had a shard that didn't have rares and only had epics, legendaries, and mythics. What would that look like? Well, it would look like a sacred shard. So let's say we had a sacred shard that had a 93% chance on an epic. It had a 6% chance on a legendary, or even a 6.5% chance on a legendary, and then 0.5% on the mythical. So that would basically be replacing sacred shards. And sacred shards are incredibly powerful, not because they drop mythicals, but because they drop legendaries and so many epics. So I think that would throw the balance off of the game. You would if we did that, you would have sacred shards that were acting like sacred shards, and then you would have primal shards that were also acting like sacred shards. That would mean they would have to keep the mythical shards extremely rare. They wouldn't let us have access to too many of them because they need mythical champions to be rare champions, but also because they can't bloat the accounts with legendary champions. They want to maintain the balance of rare, epic, and legendary champions that they've already established, and we just looked at all that data about. So instead, what it looks like is they've taken the Void Shard as the model. Now, I've heard a couple of people in the community talk about thinking of Primal Shards like Ancient Shards. And I think that makes a little bit of sense, but I actually prefer thinking of them as the new Void Shard. Now, the reason to think of them like Ancient Shards is because the drop rates are very similar to Ancient Shards. We have basically a 2x Ancient Shard event permanently in a Primal Shard, right? So we have double the chance of a Legendary, we have double the chance of an Epic, and we have a reduced chance of a Rare. So this looks a lot like a 2x Ancient Shard, and because you're not going to be getting Void Champions from this shard, we think of it as an Ancient Shard. However, the top prize for a Primal Shard is much more in keeping with the top prize of a Void Shard. The previous best champion type in the game was Void Legendary. You could only get them at a 0.5 rate from a Void Shard, and that is currently what the Primal Shard looks like. The best new rarity in the game is Mythical, and that's only dropping at a 0.5% chance from this shard, and you can only get it from this shard. So it's actually mimicking the ratios of a Void Shard a bit more than it is an Ancient Shard. So this basically looks like a 2x Ancient Shard event with the top prize being a Void Legendary. That's sort of what it looks like. We've combined these two shard types into the Primal Shard, and it makes sense because this will improve your chances of getting a Legendary slightly. Primal Shards will now yield 1% Legendary champions. We don't know about 2x events right now. My guess is there won't be a 2x Primal event for a few months. They will get to it. That's what I expect. They will get to it at some point. But right now, they want to make them extremely rare because that's going to entice players to buy these shards or to buy the quartz packs or whatever it is to get the Primal champions. So I don't think they're going to be giving us 2x Mythical events right away or 2x Primal events right away. But I do expect that they'll work that into the rotation down the road. And that means these shards will be granting 2% Legendary drops and a 32% Epic drop if they follow the format. Now, they could change the format and just increase the Mythical and the Legendary and take the percentage away from the Rare and leave the Epic at 16%. They could do that. We don't know. But this will flood the market a little bit more with Epics, which we're already flooded with, especially during 2x events. So there's a little bit of overall shard power creep, if you want to call it that, or shard inflation, in the sense that we're going to be getting more Legendaries than we've ever been getting before. We're also going to be getting more Epics than we've ever been getting before. And that's why I think the rares are on the Primal Shard. It makes sense. It makes sense from player aim standpoint, and it also makes sense from the gameplay standpoint. If we're worried about power creep, we don't want these mythical champions to be too common. They need to be rare, and they have the exact same rarity as Void Legendaries in terms of drop rates. So now the question becomes, how many shards are we actually going to get? Because if we don't have a 2x event, then our drop rate is actually going to be half of what we're normally getting for voids if we're pulling during 2x voids. Now, if we only get half as many shards, that means our actual yield is going to be a quarter of what we get in terms of void legendaries. And we already know we get less than 3 void legendaries a year. So if we're only getting a quarter of that, we might be looking at a fraction of a mythical champion per year. We might be looking at a half of a mythical champion per year. And that would be very disappointing for the free-to-play player base and the low spenders, absolutely. Now, before we just talk about that, which I do want to talk about, I just want to address the mercy system before we leave this screen. The mercy system for Primal Shards is not good. It's very much not good. And even though I've been relatively positive about what's been going on with Primal Shards and Mythic Champions so far in this video, this is the weakest point that I've seen so far. So after 75 summons without a legendary, you're going to start to get a mercy system from Primals. That's okay. That's actually slightly better than what you see from Ancient Shards. It is a 1% boost instead of the 5% boost that you see from Ancients. So the guaranteed champion from Ancients, like the guaranteed legendary champion from Ancients, comes at 220 pulls. The guaranteed legendary from Primals would come at 99 plus 75, so 174 pulls. So you're saving 46 pulls, something like that. But obviously, again, Primal Shards are going to be extremely rare. So I don't think that this is an even comparison. And I would prefer, first of all, for the mercy system to kick in somewhere around 50 or 40 or something like that, and the chance increase to be 2% or 3%. That would feel better to me. As far as the mythicals are concerned, this is awful. You need to pull 200 shards before you get into the mercy system, and then you only get a 1% increase per shard. So you could potentially pull 298, 299 primal shards without hitting. And that's absurd. That is a huge number. That is far more than ancients. It is not nearly as good a system as any of the other shards in the game. And so I think, what would be much more reasonable here would be, again, something maybe around 50 shards, maybe 100 shards. If the chance increase was the 5% that you see from ancients and voids, that would be maybe reasonable. But again, I think we're going to see a fraction of the number of ancient and void shards that we see, of sacred shards that we see. We're going to see far fewer primal shards. So getting 200 primal shards feels like that could be several years in the making. So now we need to discuss where you get the shards and where you can get the primal quartz as well. So as you can see, you can have a shard here, but you can also collect 100 primal quartz to form a primal shard. No places to get primal quartz at the moment. Okay, so that's disappointing. Maybe they will introduce a new place. There actually is one place that they've already announced that will be going into effect immediately, and that is the Hydra Clash. So here on the Hydra Clash reward screen, you can see that if you pick one of these chests, you'll notice that there is primal quartz in each of these chests. Now, in order to get one primal shard, you need 100 quartz, and you can see even the top chest only offers 30 to 75 primal quartz. So if we call that on average something like 45 or 50, it's going to take a minimum probably of 2 weeks, because these chests only come around once a week. You would have to win the top chest 2 consecutive weeks in a row, and maybe even a third week in a row, to get one primal shard. That is an incredibly low drop rate. I'm glad that they decided to add something extra to Hydra Clash. I'm glad they decided to put a place where we can farm mythic shards, or primal shards rather, and mythic champions, but this seems like an incredibly low drop rate. And so far, this is disturbing. This is not hopeful at all. I think they need to increase this drastically. I don't know why they've decided to make this a quartz thing. If it were just one shard, like if it were just, you got a primal shard from this chest guaranteed every week, if you hit this particular one, I think that would be a lot better. Or if you're going to do, quartz, then it should be over 1 shard's worth of quartz per week, because I think 1 shard a week, that's still only 52 per year. And again, we were just looking at a mercy system that's going to require us to maybe pull 300 of these primal shards in order to get a mythical champion. So there is a disconnection between these two numbers. Like, this is not, if this is the only place to get quartz, this is a really bad drop rate. Now, there are additional places we can actually farm the primal shards directly. So you can see right here, there is a primal shard as a reward for this champion training event that is going on right now. So they're already in the game and you can get them. The point total here is 12,000. That's a very high point total for a primal shard. If they put a sacred shard up here for 12,000, I would still think it's a lot, and that's got a much better drop rate for a good champion. So primal shards are less valuable than sacred shards. They're probably less valuable than void shards in terms of overall drop rate and the power that you get in terms of the return. Plus, you need more of them. And here they're putting this way, way out of reach at 12,000 points. Now, if you are going for this fusion like I am, you're already going to be getting 7,000 points. So at that point, it would just be 5,000 more points, and you would get other rewards along the way. The Ancient Shard is nice. The Immortal Soul Essence, Immortal Soulstone, all of those are good. The Legendary Skill Tome is really the big prize here. And if you're going for that Legendary Skill Tome, there is absolutely no way you don't go for the Primal Shard, because it's only a 1,000-point difference. But putting this way out here feels like you are significantly overvaluing this particular shard. Of course, they're putting the Ancient Shard at 8,000, which seems like a huge overvalue of an Ancient Shard. This should be a reward for like 2,000 points, not 8,000 points. So Raid does this. So that's it. Those are the only 2 locations, the only 2 ways we know to farm either Primal Shards or Primal Quartz. So events and tournaments, there are going to be some rewards there, and then the Hydra Clash. Now, there is talk of a guaranteed mythical champion coming from a new source. So the actual words that were used in the video that came out 3 days ago is that Raid is planning a major new feature that features a mythical champion as a reward. The most likely place that this refers to would be the third clan boss locked symbol on the clan boss screen. So we'll go over there. On the clan boss screen here, you can see right above my head, there is a third potential clan boss in the Great Void. So this could be unlocked in the next few months, and this could be the place where we can farm our free mythical champion. So I am thinking of this a lot like Mithrala. Mithrala is farmed in the Hydra clan boss, so there could be a new mythical champion that we would farm from this Great Void boss. I would look forward to this fight. That'd be very cool, and I like the idea of a mythical champion that is available to everybody. The Mithrala challenge is hard. Getting her takes some work, but it's not overwhelming. It's definitely something that everybody can do as long as they pay a little bit of attention to Hydra, make sure that they are farming at least that first difficulty level of Hydra every week. And I think if there was something similar to that in terms of a similar return rate on fragments, then I think it would be very good to have a free mythical champion here in this new clan boss. I hope they also add either quartz or primal shards here as a reward. Maybe there will be a clan boss chest that drops, and in addition to getting the fragments from the guaranteed mythical champion, the Mithrala-like mythical champion, there will also be some primal quartz that will drop here or some primal shards that could drop from these boss chests. We don't know that, but I'm hopeful because currently the sources for these shards and these quartzes are just too far out of reach for free-to-play players. And I think that means what we all know it means, which is that Raid wants us to open up our wallets to reach for our credit cards in order to buy these. So now let's talk about the economy in-game and how that's going to be affected by the introduction of this new resource. I am here in the shop now, and as you can see, we have a primal pack. It is already live. It is a single shard for $50. Now, we know that the primal packs we know that the pack shop is like the worst place to get value in the game. This is not where you want to look. You want to, go for the limited special offers, and you want to be a smart shopper and find, a cheaper deal than is in the pack shop. But let's just use this as a baseline because this is where we compare the prices. So we have a primal pack for $50, one shard for $50. If we look around, there is another pack for $50. That is this Void Shard 2-pack for $50. So you're getting 2 Void Shards for the cost of 1 Primal Shard. That feels relatively expensive. Of course, $50 is an outrageous cost for 2 Void Shards. But so you can see the relative value that Plarium is currently placing on these 2 shards. Likewise, we have a pack here of 6 Ancient Shards for $50. So again, we're saying a Primal Shard is worth 6 Ancient Shards. We actually know that it's worth a lot more than that. So in terms of these relative costs, it feels, if reasonable could be a word that we used here, I would use it. It's not reasonable, but the relative difference is actually probably favoring the Primal Shard right here. So here I am in the limited offers tab. Now I am a free-to-play player, so your deals may look significantly different than mine, but hopefully the comparison between the different shards will stay relatively consistent. Right now I have an offer for $25 US for 3 Void Shards, 1 Sacred, and 4 Ancients, plus some energy and silver. Now, based on this, it looks like at the very least, you can get a Sacred and several Voids for $25, whereas if we go back to that pack shop, we know that we were getting only 2 Voids for $50. So obviously this is a better offer, 3 Voids for half that price, plus a Sacred Shard and 4 Ancients. So a much better offer. So then right down here at the end of the row, we have an offer for Primal Shards, and we're getting 3 Primal Shards for that same $25 with 150 silver. So if we compare these 2 deals, we got 3 Void Shards versus 3 Primal Shards, plus a Sacred Shard and an Ancient Shard. So they are valuing Primal Shards here as roughly maybe 2 Void Shards again. It's pretty close, right? If you said a Sacred Shard is maybe 3 times as valuable as a Void Shard, we know that that's not true, but in terms of dollar amounts, it might be. The Ancient Shards, the energy thrown in. So you could use one of the offer calculators to kind of see what they are, what Plarium is considering a relative value between the shard types. Now, if we stop worrying about relative value and just look at absolute value, here we have 3 primal shards for $25. We know that we have a 0.5% of 1 chance drop rate on the primal shards. So assuming no 2x event and assuming that we hit according to the drop rate, it would take 200 shards in order to get 1 champion. That's the expected return, 200 shards for 1 champion. So if we do a quick calculation here, that means we need roughly, what is that, 67 packs? We need 67 packs of these 3 primal shards to hit 200 shards. And that would cost about just under $1,700. So a single mythical champion, if you buy this pack, which is the more reasonable pack, if you buy this pack at $25 for 3 primal shards, you're spending about $1,700 per mythical champion. There are 5 of them currently in the game. That is $8,000. So if you want to go ahead and spend $8,000, every person who spends $8,000 will roughly return 5 mythical champions. And this is the best version of this offer that I've seen. If you go back to the pack shop and you're talking about $50 for 1 single primal shard, then you are talking about $10,000 per mythical champion. Now that is an absurd amount of money for a single champion. By comparison, if we spent all of that money on this pack and got the different shards here, so if we bought 67 of these packs instead of 67 of the primal shard packs, our expected return would be 2 void legendaries and close to 11 non-void legendaries. So you're talking about 13 legendaries for each mythical champion. I don't think that that's a reasonable comparison. I don't think that any mythical champion is worth 2 void legendaries and 11 regular legendaries, at least not in terms of dollars spent. So what does this mean? What does this mean for the Raid Shadow Legends economy? What does this mean for players? What does this mean for the whales and the krakens who fund this game for all of us who are free-to-play players and low spenders? Well, I think it means a few things. One thing we should recognize is that Raid and Plarium, they have a pattern when they launch new content. They overprice everything at the beginning. Remember what happened with skins. When the first skins in the game came out, they were $50 US. Now, I don't have a skin offer up here, but the last skin offer I saw, I think, was about $10. So it's come down considerably from the launch of that item. Another item that came out that was overpriced were the soul stones, right? So the soul stones came out, they were very expensive and everybody objected to them. Nobody wanted to buy them and the price started to come down. And as I understand it, I don't buy packs, but they're at a much more reasonable price now than they were a few months ago. So one of the things that we have to take into consideration is this is a marketing strategy by Plarium. They don't expect these current prices to stay here forever. But players who are highly motivated to get the newest shiny thing right away may overlook the exorbitant cost and may spend their money right now on these primal shard packs. That's going to be a lot of profit for Plarium. Remember that there is no supply and demand in this economy. There is only an infinite supply and then the demand based on the price point. So as the price drops, the demand will increase. And that's what Plarium is expecting to happen, that they will have to drum up demand for these shards by lowering the prices over time until they hit a point where they feel like the number of players buying the packs and the price of the packs equal the most profit that they're likely to see. But they don't want to start with the price too low, because if they start low, they can't raise the price to that point. They would rather overprice it at the beginning and then lower the price to meet the demand of the player base. That's going to feel good to us because the price has come down. And that's also going to make sure that they don't miss the optimal price point for their profit. So what can we do as players during this time frame? Well, the most powerful thing we can do is not buy these shards. So I'm not talking to the free-to-play players now because we never buy shards. I am talking to you whales and krakens, your mid-spenders, even you low spenders. You might be really excited for these champions. You might think, I want one of these champions now. I don't want to fall behind. There's a competitive advantage out there. But we can help ourselves by helping each other. if we all just say no, if we just don't buy these shards at this price point, the prices will start to come down quickly. Now, maybe this Primal shard is a good value at, say, $9.99. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the price point should be. But let's say that would be a good value where most of the community would go, yeah, $3 a shard, $4 a shard feels pretty good. The price will get there, but it will get there faster if nobody buys at this price point. If for the next week, nobody bought any of these Primal shards, I guarantee you they would drop the price immediately. In 3 days' time, it would be at $19.99. 3 days after that, it would be at $14.99. That's the way that they're going to work. Maybe it'll come down $2 at a time. I don't know. But the point is, it is overpriced. It's overpriced intentionally, and it's taking advantage of those players who really, really want that new thing and are willing to overspend in order to get it. If you are a low to mid spender, if you are a whale or even a kraken, I highly recommend you wait. Just wait a few weeks, wait a month, see what the prices are like in a month, because it's possible that you might be able to get 2 or 3 times the resources for your dollar than you can get right now. So this video started off pretty positively with just a discussion of the champions and how I don't think there's going to be game-breaking power creep. I do think it's going to be a reasonable implementation of a new rarity, of a higher rarity. I also think the champions are pretty cool. And I think that in terms of the impact on our rosters and on the game moving forward, remember that Raid hasn't changed at all. There aren't any new fights yet that require mythical champions. Maybe the new clan boss, there'd be a lot of advantage to having a mythical champion there. I don't know. But chances are that Raid is going to keep the system that's been working so well for them. So I think Void legendaries are still going to be incredibly powerful. And I think regular legendaries are still going to be very good for free-to-play players and even endgame players in specific champions. Remember, Duchess is a non-Void legendary and she's incredibly powerful. Harima is a non-Void legendary who's incredibly powerful. Kymar is a non-Void legendary who's extremely useful in so many places. And he's a champion that there are very few copies of. There aren't many other champions that do the job that he does. So you can get a lot of value out of regular legendaries. You can get a lot of value out of the Void legendaries that we know about. And I think that's going to stay true. So there's a lot of good news here. The bad news is all of these other things that we've talked about in terms of the availability of the shards, the cost for the in-game, for the spending player, and the mercy system, of course, is entirely broken and awful. But now let's talk about the change to the game experience for the average player. I think mythical champions have become the new aspirational champion, right? These are the champions that everybody wants to get now. You want to save your shards. You want to get as many of these shards as you can, these primal shards. You want to pull. And when you pull, when you see that red flare, instead of that gold, you see that red flare, you're going to lose your mind. So the high point of pulling a legendary, the high point of pulling a void legendary has gotten even higher. And it's because these mythical champions are incredibly rare. There's only 5 of them in the game. So anybody who hits on one, anybody who takes their 2 free primal shards and actually pulls and hits on one of these champions, you're going to lose your mind. You're going to be incredibly excited for it. Obviously, it's really exciting to have the metamorph ability and to think of all the tactical possibilities for the champ. You know they're going to be powerful, so that's just a great addition to your roster, regardless of which one you get. Yeah, so it's going to be a great experience in terms of shard pulling events. We're going to see a lot of videos over the next couple of days of people hitting and going crazy and having their let's go moments. So yeah, we're going to have that. And I think that's good for the game. I also think that's good for the end game player, right? To have a new type of aspirational champion that is difficult to get, that requires investment in terms of time and in-game endeavors, trying to get those quartz, trying to get those shards. It's also something for the whales and the krakens eventually, hopefully not right away, but eventually to spend money on, because they may already have all of the regular legendaries and all of the void legendaries in the game. So having this additional rarity above void legendary, I think, is exciting for everybody in the game. As far as how it's going to affect your day-to-day, I don't think it's going to affect your day-to-day at all if you don't pull one of these champions. If you do pull one of these champions, that will affect your roster, just like pulling any good champion would affect your roster. But if you don't pull one of these, you still have your legendaries, you still have your void legendaries, you still have all the great epics that are in the game. I am a free-to-play player. I can currently do everything in the game, and I don't have a single mythical champion. So mythical champions aren't going to unlock anything for me. They're going to be fun when shard pull events come around. They're going to be great to build out and mess around with if you have one on your roster, but they don't actually change the game experience for most players. And in fact, if they do add one free mythical champion that everybody can achieve, maybe through that new clan boss mechanic, then I think what we're going to be doing, let's say it's Siegfried here, I think we're all going to be really excited about getting that champion, and we're going to feel like that's a good reward for an investment, just like Lydia is for completing the faction crypts, or just like Arbiter is for completing the Arbiter missions. We're going to go after these champions. It's going to give us purpose and direction in our accounts, and I think that's a good thing. So I think the overall experience with these champions is going to be a positive for the entire community outside of the economic stuff. So I think it's a mixed bag here. I think we have some positive aspects of this. I think it's going to be implemented in a relatively non-game breaking way. Games need to evolve over time or they die, right? In the world of gaming, if you're not growing, you're dying. And so Raid is investing still. They're evolving the game. We have more game content to look forward to. We have more interesting tactical options to look into now with these mythical champions. So I think the game has gotten more complex, more interesting, more challenging, and that's all a good thing. I think the downside is that there is going to be more separation between the Krakens and the whales, maybe the whales and the mid-spenders. I don't think it's going to affect free-to-play life very much at all. The economics of it aren't great. I do think that as a group, we are powerful and we can tell Plarium we think the economics are not great, and we're going to demand that they not gouge us this much on these packs. I also think we can speak with our voice as a community and say, we want more access to these champions. We want more things we can do that are going to reward us with these primal shards, with the primal quartz. We can talk about drop rates. I think Plarium listens when we speak with a single voice and when we speak with our wallets. If we don't do those two things, if we don't all act in concert, if we're all split up amongst ourselves and we're all arguing about what's good and what's not, then Plarium doesn't have to listen to us. Likewise, if we say one thing with our voices, but say another thing with our wallets, Plarium's just going to laugh its way to the bank. So I think that what we need to do collectively as a community is let them know that we are interested in spending money on primal shards, but not at this price point. We are interested in promoting the game, but we need more return for our time in the game in terms of access to these mythical champions, or we're not going to be happy. So if Plarium gives us a little bit, comes down, listens to the community, then I think the inclusion of these champions can be really a good thing, not only for the game, but for the players who are currently playing the game and for the life of the game moving forward. But if not, it will be a sticking point, and I don't think it'll be the economic windfall that Plarium expects it to be. And I also don't think it'll be something that makes the player base very happy, because we don't like being taken advantage of. And that's what it feels like. They've given us something cool, but it's sort of like, you know, when you tease your dog, you like shake the ball in front of him and you're like, hey, you want to play? And he's like, yeah, I want to play. And then you get him to, like, you know, come inside and you give him a pill that the vet gave you. Like, you're tricking us by giving us something shiny into doing something that's not good for us. And we don't like that. We're not stupid. Players are intelligent. Player communities are intelligent, and we want to be treated fairly. And this doesn't feel like we're being treated fairly. I understand what's happening. Maybe we'll be treated fairly in the future, or more fairly. But this is why there's all that anger. This is why there's all that disappointment. The good news is, if you've enjoyed Raid so far, keep enjoying Raid. Keep playing. You're going to be fine. If you're a spender, hold on to your wallets for a while. You know, put a leash on that credit card. Let them know that these prices are unreasonable and that they need to listen to us a little bit more in order to get us to spend money on this game. Okay, that is it for me. I hope you've enjoyed this analysis. I hope you like the content. Feel free to hit the like button or subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate that. Thanks so much for hanging out. I've been Colred, and I will see you in another video very soon.